Welcome, everyone, to Employer Content Show, part of the Talent Insight series brought to you by Hire Well and Before You Apply. I'm your host, James Hornick. Joining me is my co-host from Before You Apply, soon-to-be employer brand pariah, Nate Guggia.
Hey, bud.
we were thrown off here because I was going to have Nate intro this one. We decided last minute not to because he was afraid of reading on camera. I think he's one of those people that gets choked up and he can't read, when you're off the page. Yeah, but
it's hard for me.
But the reason why is because I think this topic's going to fall largely on you, because I'd like to think that the first 13 shows we've done was just building up to this one.
Oh, geez.
The show where Nate just dumps on employer brand, his own profession, and all the tradition. Is that not where this is headed? I don't know.
I don't know. We'll see. I don't know. You built it up to be that way.
So I built up to be that way, but from like our conversation starting this, it sounds like you were waffling on it, and that's that whole thing. The title was a question: is employer brand still relevant?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that is the question.
Yeah. I'll let you jump in with a point to get us started, but I think I don't know. The reason I wanted to have this conversation so much is because I don't think we should ever have like a fixed mindset about the industry that we're in, or about like really like anything. And it's pretty interesting to like, as I've gotten into this and as I've been like a practitioner with like creating content on LinkedIn, and I've seen how there's so much crossover between things that promote your company and promote an employer brand. And like, it's just my mindset and like my thinking about this has really evolved to the point where I'm at today, where it's like, I question this and I go like, how relevant is it? How intentional does it need to be? And is there this like cool area that companies can play in that kind of like hits on all the things? So
yeah, here's where I'm gonna just so we don't bury the lead. Here's where at the end of this conversation, here's where we're gonna land. I'm gonna predict this. We're going to say that it's very important for some organizations who are trying to get their name out and completely irrelevant for others. I think that's where we're going to end up on this one, but let's get there.
Okay.
I'll start us off since you weren't prepared. There's a reason why.
Actually.
Yeah. There's a reason why we call this the Employer Content Show and not the Employer Brand Show. And that's because I believe on some level, and I mean this in a half serious, kind of kidding, but kind of not way, that all brand is inherently bullshit. Like on some level, and I know people are going to jump out of their chair. People are working in marketing and branding. Like, what are you talking about? That's my profession. But like on some level, it's just whatever your brand is, your company's doing, or you yourself or whatever is doing great and innovative stuff. And you're talking about what you're doing, and everything else you add into that is just spin. High level, okay. Right? Now, before people, let me kind of break this down a bit. Now, here's where people will agree with it. Here's where everybody who loves branding is going to agree. I'm going to say, so corporate brand, employer brand, personal brand, right? If I go and say, guys, personal brand's bullshit, you're going to have a million people agree with that.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a crock. It's totally made up. But why is that? Why is personal brand some different thing than everything else? Why is it different than employer brand, or why is it different than corporate brand? It's because it's not so much that on its face there's anything wrong with personal brand. It's because that people are sick of how personal brand has been turned into self-promotion. People who don't really know anything, talking about how they're experts, vanity metric chasing. Then those same people selling courses on how to become personal brand. They're just talking about talking, basically, right? And everyone's just nauseated by it. In every industry this exists. This isn't just like a LinkedIn thing. Like there's in the fitness industry, there's a million of these like charlatans out there, right? But that comes back to the point where like there's the ability to just spin things exists in brand. Whereas the reason why we call this the Employer Content Show is I maintain that regardless of what you're doing, whether it's personal, whether it's employer, whether it's corporate, content is great. If you focus on creating value for your audience, and that's your goal is just to, whatever your domain knowledge is, articulate, answer people's questions in a way that's going to help them. You then in turn build your brand. Like the brand becomes the after effect or the afterthought, whether it's personal, employer, corporate, whatever. Because your intention is to build value, right? Because that's the thing is like you could go out and say personal brand's bullshit, and guess who's going to jump on that? You're going to see a bunch of people who because they're very active on social agree with that, and you're like, but wait, don't these people have killer personal brands? Like I could say that about me, right? And they're like, oh, friggin' James is saying like that's kind of hypocritical. No, right? Because like I don't really give a crap if like people know me. I'm not selling any courses. I don't really give a crap who's following me. You know what I mean? Like my intention is to help my company build business. And the way I'm going to do that is by building goodwill, by helping others through content or through direct actions. That's my entire MO, right?
Yeah.
And that becomes your brand. Employer brand's the same damn thing. So there are companies, and I maintain that with employer brand, you're building a good company and then you're talking about what you're doing.
Right.
That's it. And when I hear, and this isn't my space, so I kind of need to lean on you a little bit more for this, but when people talk about the whole theory of it, you need to come with your employer value proposition, all these super complicated things to describe the process of like, you have to, and I'll have some examples of this later. You have to build a cool ass company. You have to treat your employees well. You have to be a destination firm, which we've talked about before. Like those are the things that are really important. And then it's just using content to talk about it.
Okay. Go. All right. Okay. So I want to make sure that we're talking about, I hate to like split hairs. It like really frustrates me when people do that, but I think it's important here to like just establish some context. So like your employer brand, let's just talk about like what an employer brand is, right? An employer brand is the perception that your employees and candidates have about what it's like to work at your company. That perception exists regardless of anything you do, true or not. And the true or not piece is the reputation part, right? So if we go, you want to say?
Agreed. No, I'm just agreeing.
Yeah. So if we go, okay, that perception of that reputation that exists, whether you do anything intentional around it or not, we can all agree on that. Now, the employer branding piece is what I think about, like the intention behind it. It's like the action, the act of putting stuff out so people know about who you are and what you're doing. I think there are some companies like who have earned the right to not have to do that anymore because they have they're building the coolest thing. They run their company in the right way, whatever. Like they don't have to put emphasis or intention behind putting that stuff out there. Now there's a lot of companies who haven't earned that right yet for one reason or another. They just don't have that level of awareness, or maybe they're not building the coolest thing or whatever. So now like I go to like, for companies who need to be proactive and do something about it, what does that look like? I think there's two questions that I want to like make sure we answer here is if you are going to do employer branding, what does it look like today, or what should it look like? And two, where should this sit in your organization?
Okay.
Two things that I've been thinking about a lot lately. Okay.
Got it.
You want me to keep going with that?
Keep going. I got a good answer for the last one, but I need you to lead the first one a little better.
Okay. That sounds good. I think in the employer branding space, you mentioned EVPs for one. We've talked about EVPs.
Yeah.
I have my opinions about them. I think the reason why either companies or consultants push the EVP thing and say like, this is where we have to start, is because they don't think that they can get to the content piece without it. It's like, we have to do this level of discovery in order for us to put stuff out. I argue that you don't have to. I think that you can put stuff out and use that as a mechanism to learn all the things that you would otherwise learn by investing tons of money and time into an EVP. And I also think employer branding now, it's changed. Best practices would be, you need to tell employee stories. You need to, trust me, this is all stuff that like we have done as a company and people have paid us to do this. I think now it's more of like documenting the things that you're doing and how you're doing them and why you're doing them and things like that. There's this wonderful example. There's this woman on LinkedIn that I've started following recently. Her name's Carrie Rose.
Mhm.
She's I think she's the CEO or founder of Rise at 7, which is a digital marketing agency in the UK. She is doing the coolest things, and I don't even know if she realizes that it's employer branding. Like just recently, she took a screenshot of her calendar and then talked about in a post about how she's implemented this company-wide policy where there's like 2-hour time blocks that are dedicated to like her employees, I think like getting outside or doing something that is non-work related.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's employer branding. That's what it, in my opinion, that's what it needs to look like today. That is like, it is not sexy. It doesn't take any money to do it. It is just showing cool things that you're doing as a company. And like, I've been following her for like maybe a week or two, not even that long. And she does this kind of stuff pretty consistently.
Okay.
And I'm like, shit, if I was a candidate, I'd love to work for her.
Yeah. What you're getting you're someone who's an executive of a company just giving a no bullshit everyday take of what they're doing. Like that's what people want to hear about versus like what adjectives would you use to describe your initiatives and whatever.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. Okay. Your second part, where do you think it should sit?
Where do I think it should sit?
Yeah. Where do you think it should sit?
All right. I think it should sit wherever the resources are. That's, and hold on. There's a part being that. Okay. I think it should sit wherever the resources are. Most likely those resources sit in marketing.
Okay.
Now, if you would have asked me this question 6 or 8 months ago, I would have said, without a doubt, employer branding needs to sit in talent because it needs to be close to recruiters because they are helping recruiters hire people. Like I would have been adamant about that. I'm not anymore because like that's like saying that marketing needs to sit in sales because marketing's job is to help salespeople have more conversations or have more demos. I think it's a ridiculous argument. I think employer brand, I think it makes a lot of sense for employer brand to sit under marketing and to maybe not even be called employer branding at all. And to just have it be like a part of one function that addresses the overall audience that this company is trying to reach. But it can still have a close relationship with recruiting in the same way that like marketing or corporate branding has a close relationship with sales.
I'm unfortunately going to agree. I say unfortunately because I was hoping we'd be a little more split on this, but I think if you break it down in terms of, I really think that people take job descriptions and responsibilities and their silos a little too literally in most organizations. And all it really takes to get people to change their focus on what they're doing is just comp them differently or bonus them differently or have them focus in a different area or add something else to their plate, So if you tell your marketing people, like you have these like 2, 3, 4 things, traditional marketing responsibilities plus attracting candidates. And here's how we're going to measure that. Boom. Like that solves so much. Or like the reason why marketers might not care about employer brands because it's not their job, but like making it, I believe that whoever, kind of as you said, when you started your answer, like whoever is communicating with the outside, determining what your message is, like, why would you have 2 different groups doing that? Like it makes no sense. Like there should be one unified, solidified message. But there's different organizations that are like, I think that if you wanted to, this is something we're actually implementing this week, which I'm really excited about.
Oh yeah.
I'll let you know how it goes. Is that because I think it all comes down to content, and we've always encouraged people to get involved in our own content processes. Our content hasn't been specifically about. We haven't done it with the intention of of hiring, right? We don't create a lot of our content because like hiring is our main thing, but that's how it's panned out. Like the amount of hires we've made, like it's come up in like every conversation we have is that's how people typically hear of us, And I know that like Nathan Jefferson, our friend, had this idea, and we talked about it before, is that if you want to get your employees talking about things on social or creating content, creating video content versus wouldn't it make more I should say, wouldn't it make more sense to do some sort of spot bonus, referral bonus, kicker incentive to get involved that way versus just paying them a month, like a huge amount for individual employee referrals? Is this like a different concept of going about it, creating the overall, getting more people kind of involved? But that still comes down to how people are aligned and how you're compensating them, what expectations you're having, you know what I mean? Whether or not these are kind of mandatory part of the job or something kind of optional they can do. I believe that, so yes, I agree that it makes more sense to have this align with marketing. I think recruiting should be a little more aligned with marketing than it is in most organizations to begin with. But I think that marketing's job, and not to throw more responsibilities onto marketing people, and maybe they'll hate this, that hiring needs to be seen as partially a part of marketing's responsibility. And, that way, whatever your corporate branding messages are and your employer branding messages are, like, these things are getting integrated and being thought through by the same people.
Yeah. There's a couple huge benefits of stripping away the employer brand terminology or title, and just and thinking about this in terms of content, audience, and channels, right?
Yeah.
And just because we can't help. I mean, we have to acknowledge the stigma that comes with employer branding. There's a lot of marketers who just straight up think employer branding is bullshit. Like, it's whatever. It's like it plays second fiddle at most companies. And what you see a lot is marketing's been established. Marketing has built out budgets and teams and this kind of thing, and they're operating over here in the way that marketing does. They know their data, they know their campaigns, they're testing stuff, they're reporting. They are held responsible for revenue. And then you have talent and employer brand plopped on top of it, which gets half-assed. And it came really late to the party. And the reason it came late to the party was because suddenly this company was probably growing really fast and they had to hire a bunch of people. And they're like, what do we do? Nobody knows who we are. And we have to start thinking about employer branding. None of that even makes sense.
Yeah.
But because it came late to the party, nobody has any respect for it. And instead, if we stripped all that away and we just saw it as content, channel, audience, and put it all together, then suddenly, like you said, there's alignment on messaging, there's alignment on initiatives, there's joint campaigns, there's content, there's shared content resources, because now you're just looking at audience, and there's budget, and there's respect, because you're all falling under one umbrella that everybody everybody understands the meaning and the purpose of this function. I think it would eliminate a lot. I don't have any hope for that happening at a large company. But I think startups who are just starting to think about employer branding, the need to hire people, they're seeing how competitive it is. They want to start telling those stories about how they're doing things. I think startups can really change this industry. I put all my hope in startups.
Well, yeah, and this is kind of driving towards what we said at the beginning. I want to get into category design here for a second. I'm still not sure I've got my fully formed opinion on it, but as you were saying, this is more relevant in some companies than others. Love that mug, by the way. Show it to everybody on camera. That's amazing.
Yeah, dude. It's great.
Anyways, yeah. So here's the thing. So category design, maybe branding is completely irrelevant, period. Maybe there's some organizations that, because of the nature of they've constructed this persona in terms of their value they can provide to both customers and to employees, that they don't need to spend any branding because everyone knows who the F they are, right? So I was Amazon is an example. When I think Amazon, right, here's what I think. You can tell me what you think. Innovative e-commerce company, make their customers' lives easier, ruthlessly crush the competition. People there probably work long hours and they get amazing experience, and it sets them up for the rest of their career when they leave in a couple of years.
Yeah.
When I think Amazon, that's what I think, because I look at it from both. I've talked to a lot of people who work there, and I'm a huge Amazon fan as a consumer, right? So, but do they do employer branding? I don't know, but that's how I know them. They're in a category of their own. I don't know any other company that checks all those boxes, at the same time.
Yeah. They might technically do employer branding. I don't know how much.
I'm sure they do. They have so much money. They probably do. You know, that's the one thing that gets skewed from my perspective is that I'm probably not anybody's target market for their employer branding. So I don't always see it, but this is the word on the street. You know, this is how people know them, because I do talk to enough people that, you know, everyone has that same perception of them. Everyone kind of knows everyone knows, like, if I go there, I'm going to get paid. I'm going to get like amazing experience. Might get burned out, but that's okay, because 2 years later, I'm going to get a better job than I have now.
Yeah. I mean, last time we talked, you used the Zappos example.
Yeah.
I mean, Zappos was brilliant in the way that, like, they marketed company culture. They marketed their own, but they just marketed the need to pay attention to it.
Yeah.
It's like they influenced an entire industry.
They did it before everyone else was talking about it. Like all the stuff we talk about now, because I read that book and I realized that book was written in 2010. Like no one was talking about this shit back then.
No.
You know, but I mean, that was a lot of it comes down to, like, his core philosophy was that, you know, your brand is just a lagging indicator of your culture. You know, you build what you want and make your company whatever you want it to be, and then you're going to get known for that, which is, I guess, what happens, in my perception at least, how I view Amazon.
Yeah.
Like, they are what they are. And this is how, as someone who sees kind of both the employment side of it, talking to people who have worked there, as well as a consumer, like, that's how I view Amazon, and I dig it. So,
yeah, no, for sure. I think, you know, like I mentioned earlier, like there's some companies who have just, like, earned the right to, like, not have to emphasize the employer brand side of things. But,
and I guess tying it back to the category, like, my take on employer category design is those companies that they created their own category where they don't have to play by the rules everyone else does. It's not a rat race for them in terms of, like, how are we going to brand ourselves to stand out, because they've created something and positioned themselves in a way that, in the eyes of job seekers, there is no comparison.
Yes. Every other company is competing for the talent that they're.
Yes. They've positioned themselves in a category, a subcategory of the hiring market, and they're the leader, and everyone else is just, like, trying to find a way to compete.
Yep, exactly. I was going to say, oh yeah. So if that is a company, if that is you, for example, you have to emphasize the retention piece, which is like the employee experience, employee engagement piece. Because if you can dominate your little corner, like Amazon, your big corner of the market, and you can, like, hoover up all the talent because of what you're doing, then you have to keep those people. You have to do everything you can to keep those people, which then if you're doing a really poor job of that, then the whole thing becomes problematic, because then that reputation that we talked about earlier is damaged, and the word gets out, and people know that, like, yeah, they're crushing the competition, but, like, they suck to work for. And then all of a sudden, now that's your employer brand. Your employer brand is, like, created for it. Yeah.
That dovetails perfectly into the last thing I had prepared for this.
Oh, good. Okay.
This exact same thought. Like, okay, isn't it just really about retention then?
Yeah.
Isn't it just like, how do you build a company where you retain employees and people just find out about that because your employees stick around forever and they love the place, and it organically, like, the word gets out. So I went back to my team. Okay. I'm like, guys, I want to know, what are companies that people just don't leave? Like, what are companies that you don't even try to pull people from actively, because you know it's going to be a waste of your time, because people just don't leave these places. Not entirely, but and so I noticed there's a couple recurring themes here. So I'm going to give some examples, and I'm people at these companies, these are all positives. You should be very proud you made this list, because it means you're doing something right. Okay. First one's actually they're a relatively newer client of ours, and which is good, because these are the kind of companies you want to have as clients, because people interview there and love it. So, like, Ulta, you familiar with Ulta Beauty?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they're great. They're western suburbs of Chicago. So I was asking, so in the past, like, people, like, anytime we talk to somebody from, like, Ulta, they're like, love the culture, they pay well, good benefits, location. And that's the thing with a lot of these things in Chicago. Like, a lot of times, like, these guys are western suburbs. So it's like they have kind of a niche of, like, you know, people who want to have a sweet company, because a lot of the best companies are downtown, So if you're like in the suburbs and you're a sweet place to work, that's even like you have like your own kind of niche kind of carved out and your own little category developed. But yeah, people just checks all the boxes of like good pay, sweet culture, doing cool stuff. That's going to be the big three things you're going to hear a lot on this list. Crate and Barrel, same reasons. They're in the northern suburbs. So they got a little bit of like a location category niche. A lot of people live in the North Shore, don't want to come downtown, but people are happy with the pay and benefits there. People think they're doing cool stuff. People like the culture. People don't leave. Seems like genius. I don't know what kind of employer brand these guys do. I just know that maybe they don't need to have to do anything. Then there were some ones I wasn't as familiar. I wasn't at the team. So Peapod Digital Labs. Like that's everyone who works there that we've talked to over the last several years. Like pay well, doing cool shit. Like it's hard to compete against that. You know, that's what retains people. Braintree, which is part of PayPal now. Like, like these guys are great. You can't pull people out of Braintree. Like it's just impossible. Like they pay well. The culture is great. Great leadership. Like doing cool stuff in a cool industry. Like they created a category. You know, there's other. So I could keep going on. There are more potentially, but yeah. But you see the theme. It's like it comes down to of like if you have rewarding pay, you know what I mean. If you're a little above average with what's out there or way above average, you know, whatever it is, people are excited about the actual work you have them doing and you have a good culture. Like you get those three things right, you're going to retain employees. And once you do that, hiring new employees is really easy because everyone's on the same page, saying the same things. Yeah. And at that point, like for those companies, because I would say you could always argue that's how you create your own category, because there's other things that are going to be more specific to these places where their location or the business they're in or like the industry they're in or whatnot. But within those sub niches, like everyone else is competing against you.
Yeah. You know, Basecamp did an amazing job of this. Yeah. They came out with Rework. You know, like Rework was one of those books that was just like company culture, way of working kind of thing. I'd imagine their retention is extremely high. Yeah.
I heard him talking on an interview once. It was just such a different take.
Like, it is. Jason Fried was that?
Yeah. He doesn't give a crap about trying to like become the next unicorn. He's just we're just going to create great products and have a great environment. And the only people we care about are our customers, you know, like in terms of like who buys our product. We're there. It's just a different take on trying to just provide value to that's their focus, is providing value to the customers they have and knowing that not everyone's gonna be a fit for them, but they're okay with that.
Mm-hmm. You know, like, okay, there's two things. Like one, I want to touch on content for sure, because there's something I've been thinking about, but also like going back, I think like, I would accept at this point the argument that employer branding is bullshit. I would, because I know there's definitely a lot of people who feel that way. But if that's going to be your argument, you have to agree that the retention piece, which is the things that you're talking about, building a company the right way that makes people stay, like, is extremely important, and that's what matters. Because I just, it's fine if you want to argue that it's BS, but you have to like emphasize the internal stuff.
You can't. I would say that. Yeah, I agree. You can't. It can't be smoke and mirrors does not work for hiring.
Yeah. So
that's a way of saying it. So.
You know, but then. I don't know. I mean, that is your employer brand. So I don't know. I mean, it's all connected. Back to, can we talk about content?
Sure. That's all we talk about. That's what the show's about.
Nah, I don't want to talk about content today. Okay. So I've been back to like what I think employer branding should look like now. Today. Okay. I think a lot of employer branding that we see is like 5 years ago stuff, but just again, so many companies are like late to the party. They're looking back at like best practices or like what consultants are telling them to do. And it's just like all like the same old stuff, you know, it's why we don't see like a lot of creativity or like risk taking out there, which is why I love what like Carrie Rose is doing. Dude, I loved what Nicole Parrish did yesterday, where she took a picture like after getting her COVID shot and talking about how like her company like kind of allowed her to do that. And then you jumped in with a funny comment, which is like, that's perfect. I like, we need more of that, you know?
Yeah. She got the Pfizer shot. I got the Moderna. Moderna is far superior.
But it was just like, it was just like such a like fun little exchange, you know? And, but I think about this now, like we've talked about this a couple shows ago where like this like micro branding. And this is why I think if we move the employer branding piece, like wrap it into like this overall branding, marketing, whatever function, you can look internally and go, let's help all of our functions build their own brands. There's I had this conversation yesterday with somebody who works with like really earlier stage company, seed, A round, things like that. She's like, you know, I talked to them about employer branding, and like a lot of them like a lot of founders have no idea what I'm talking about. I said, yeah, that's because they don't speak that language. But if you tell them like, hey, you need to build your engineering brand because you're hiring engineers, they immediately would go, oh, I totally understand why I would do that. That makes a whole lot of sense. And so looking at it that way and go like, okay, how can we help each one of our functions build their own brand in a way that makes sense for that audience, that industry? Obviously there's a lot of ways to do that, but I thought, how cool would it be if like, you know, every department in your company had their own podcast and had their own like creative process, all the stuff that like you and I do with our own companies, where like we record something, we chop it up into video, we turn it into a blog post. And like, if that was done at like the department level, where you had this like sales podcast that was like talking about your industry, that could like one, just impact the entire industry. It could educate your buyer. If salespeople found it and started following it, it'd be a company they'd want to work for.
Yeah.
But you could just
it would from a results standpoint, if you could pull it off, it would 100% work. I have zero doubt about that. The challenge though is going to be getting buy-in from anyone to actually like do the work, right? So you either have to the challenge with any of these content stuff is that it takes a while to see the result and see the payoff. I think everyone who's done this can agree with that. And it might take 6 months, you know?
Yeah.
But once it does, it's not a straight line. It's like a hockey stick type graph where all of a sudden you see the things start to pay off. But you need someone at the very top to really drive these types of things, even incent people until you get to that point, you know? And that's where it's not going to happen on its own. So you need visionary leadership who's bought in on the whole concept that can get everyone else to buy in. And that's the thing that's always toughest. Yeah.
But if you have somebody who's like truly leading this and like looking at, again, content channel audience, it's like, okay, I'm going to like guide this. I'm going to provide the resources, you know, whatever it might be. I mean, it's totally doable. I just think like, thinking in terms like, instead of going like our employer brand is this and talking about like the company and stuff, if you just look at it like our engineering brand is this, our sales brand is this, and start like, that's how you like really show you're different. Which I don't know, that's where you can just like, you can really make an argument that looking at it through that lens allows you to like just see the crossover between your audiences. Like they all meet in one place and they all care about certain things, and finding out like what your customers and like what your candidates both care about, and creating stuff at that point makes this whole thing just like come together. And like, I don't know.
I think it comes down to the leadership of those departments. Do they understand that their team is what makes them successful or not? And, you know, do they realize the urgency in hiring? Because what I see from a recruitment standpoint is you work with some companies where they have hiring managers who are really bought in. They're willing to go the extra mile, you know what I mean, to do what they need to get people on board. Then you have others who are hard to pin down. They've pushed this off to their internal recruitment staff. They're flighty and not available. They think hiring is somebody else's job. Just send me resumes. Like those people are never going to do this. You know what I mean?
You know, man, I think 99% of companies or people aren't going to do this. That's how it always goes.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, like, I mean, even I don't know.
So maybe this is a topic for next show, so we don't get completely sidelined. But I think just discussing like buy-in strategies, how do you get people bought in? To driving that. Like, I don't know if I have the answer to that, but I think that's maybe the hardest thing is how do you get more of an organization to buy in? Because like we've said before, like everyone loves the idea of, employee generated content. Now there's some other issues with that, but still the hardest thing is whether it's like your senior leaders or anybody else is like, how do you get buy-in? So,
well, okay. Let me give a little preview. Sorry, I can't.
All right, go for it.
I can't not say it. I don't know if it was like when we were doing our prep or if we were like actually live when I was telling you about this marketing leader I was talking to this morning. I think it might have been prep. But anyway, okay. I was talking to her and I just like kind of in preparation for the show, I just straight up asked her, like, do you think employer branding is bullshit? And she said, like, I used to totally think that. And then it wasn't until we really needed to hire in a really competitive space and leadership came to me and said, like, you need to build our employer brand. And she was just telling me like the terminology, like they weren't talking to me in a way that like I understood. It didn't make sense. Like I'm a marketer, I think differently. And I think this is what I was coming back to, like in talking to like a founder and saying like, you need to build your engineering brand. It's just like, it's a different way of approaching something and you're doing it in a way that the person you're talking to understands. That's where I think there's a lot of miscommunication, which is another problem that could be solved by like wrapping this all into like one department.
Yeah. All right. Let's dive deeper on this next time.
All right.
I like where your head's at. All right, buddy. That's a wrap for the Employer Content Show. If you want to hear more of what Nate and I have to say, you can subscribe to the Hire World channel on YouTube, where we have a playlist of all of our episodes, and the Talent Insights podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and Spotify. Nate, thanks again. And everyone out there, we will see you soon.
Bye.